The night air was thick with humidity, and the glow of the streetlights seemed dimmer than usual along County Road 47. Evan had taken this road dozens of times on his way home from work, but tonight, everything felt unfamiliar, off, as though he'd slipped into some version of the world that wasn't entirely his own. His car hummed along steadily, headlights cutting through the curtain of mist that had rolled in without warning. Every so often, he glanced at the clock on his dashboard, 12:03 a.m. He told himself not to overthink it. It was just another late-night drive. Still, the silence pressed down heavier than usual. Most of the time, there would be a few cars in the distance, headlights peeking around the bends, maybe a pair of taillights far ahead. But tonight, there was nothing. Evan hadn't passed a single car since leaving the gas station 20 minutes earlier. The road was utterly deserted, stretching endlessly before him like a black ribbon unraveling into the unknown. He tried to comfort himself with music, flipping through the radio stations, but all he found was static, distorted voices, and the occasional burst of garbled sound that made him snap the dial off altogether. He decided he preferred the silence to that. As the minutes stretched, a gnawing sensation settled in his gut. Something was wrong. His headlights illuminated the trees crowding the sides of the road, their branches twisting in strange shapes like skeletal hands reaching out of the dark. Occasionally, his eyes caught fleeting movements in his peripheral vision, like shadows darting between the trunks. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, telling himself it was just deer. Still, he couldn't shake the impression that something was pacing him in the forest, keeping perfect speed with his car. His heart beat faster, and every turn of the road seemed to drag him deeper into nowhere. Then he saw it. Up ahead, in the glow of his headlights, a figure stood at the side of the road. A man, or at least the shape of one. Evan slowed instinctively, squinting through the windshield. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, its face obscured beneath the hood of a sweatshirt. It didn't move as the car approached, didn't lift a thumb like a hitchhiker would. It simply stood there, still as stone, head angled slightly as though watching him. A cold shiver coursed down Evan's spine. He didn't stop. He pressed the gas, heart hammering, and as the car passed, he dared one glance into the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. Not just receding into the distance, gone. The side of the road where it had been was empty, the mist swirling lazily as if nothing had been there at all. Evan's mouth went dry, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He flicked his eyes back and forth between the road and the mirror, every nerve in his body screaming to keep going, not to pull over, not to look too long. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if exhaustion had played tricks on his vision. But then, faintly through the static of his car radio, he heard it, a voice whispering his name. Elena held her breath as the pale orb swayed slightly in the darkness, hovering like a lantern suspended by invisible hands. Her flashlight beam trembled across the ground, but no matter how much she tried to angle it toward the glow, the light seemed immune, untouched by her efforts. She wanted to shout, to demand if someone was there, but the words caught in her throat. Her voice, she realized, didn't feel like it belonged here, as if the forest had already swallowed any right she had to speak. The footsteps returned, louder this time, moving in a slow arc behind her. She spun in place, her light catching only trunks and tangled branches. The glow, however, had shifted closer. It now floated just beyond the reach of her flashlight, throbbing in perfect rhythm with her racing pulse. The silence was broken by a faint rustle high in the trees, like something large repositioning itself overhead. She could feel the weight of eyes, too many, too close. Though when she looked up, only the skeletal fingers of branches stared back at her. Summoning courage, Elena stepped forward. One pace, then two. The orb didn't retreat this time. It lingered, waiting. She noticed that the ground between her and the light seemed different. The leaves there weren't scattered in autumn's usual carpet but pressed flat, almost polished, as though countless feet had worn a hidden path. The realization chilled her. If this glow was a lure, she wasn't the first to follow it. Her hand clenched her phone, useless without a signal. The smooth glass sweating with the warmth of her palm, she whispered, almost pleading, "Hello." Her voice was thin, broken by nerves. yet the forest seemed to react. The glow flared once, bright enough to make her squint, then dimmed again to its steady pulse. At that exact moment, the footsteps stopped. Silence poured over her like water. In the distance, a faint ringing sound drifted through the trees, as though someone had struck a glass bell. The tone was clear, sharp, and yet mournful. Each echo stretched longer than the last, tugging at something deep in her chest. Unable to resist, Elena edged closer until she was only a few steps away. The orb floated at her eye level now, its light shimmering like mist contained in glass. She could almost see movement inside it, shadows writhing and curling, too purposeful to be random. Just as she reached out her hand, her phone screen lit up on its own, blinding her with sudden brightness. A single new message had appeared: "Don't touch it." Her breath caught. No number, no signal, no explanation. Elena froze, her hand hovering inches from the orb. The words on her phone screen pulsed faintly as though in sync with the strange glow. "Don't touch it." She backed up a step, pulse hammering in her throat. The air seemed heavier now, pressing on her chest like a weight. She knew she should turn around, retrace her steps to the car, and leave this place behind, but something deeper, a quiet pull in her gut, anchored her to the spot. The forest wasn't letting her go. The orb dimmed until it was no brighter than a dying ember, and then it began to drift sideways, weaving slowly between the trees. It wasn't random. It moved with intent, beckoning her forward. Every few feet it would pause, throb, and wait until she caught up. The trail behind her seemed to dissolve into darkness, swallowed whole by shadow. If she left now, she wasn't sure she'd even find her way back. Her flashlight's beam looked pitiful against the suffocating black. Her phone vibrated violently in her hand. She glanced down, startled to see her screen glitching, static lines across the glass, numbers and letters flickering too fast to read. Then, buried in the static, she heard something faint. A voice. At first, it was nothing more than distorted whispers, as though a radio were struggling to find a signal. She held the phone closer to her ear, straining to catch a word, and then she did. "Elena." The whisper was her name. Clear. Too clear, the sound made her knees weak. She dropped the phone in the leaves, heart clenching as the glow surged brighter again. Its pulsing grew faster, like it was excited, like it was feeding off her fear. She crouched to grab the phone, but before her fingers touched it, the static voice returned, louder now, layered with multiple tones, as if dozens of mouths were speaking through the same broken channel. "Follow, follow, follow." The word looped until it almost became a chant. The forest around her shifted in rhythm with the chant. Branches creaked overhead, swaying without wind. Shadows leaned toward her, stretching unnaturally long across the ground. She felt as though she had stepped not into woods, but into a chamber, a place where rules of sound and movement bent. With trembling fingers, she stuffed the phone into her pocket and looked back at the orb. It had stopped moving. It waited for her again, hovering above the pressed path like a key dangling before a locked door. And despite everything, the warning, the voices, Elena stepped forward. The orb floated ahead like a patient guide, its pale glow bleeding across the pressed-down leaves that formed the hidden trail. Elena followed, one hesitant step at a time, her boots muffled against the unnatural silence. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it was absent. No crickets, no rustling, no distant hum of the city. Even her own breaths felt wrong, too loud, swallowed before they could echo. The deeper she went, the more she realized the trail wasn't part of the forest at all. It was something carved through it, as though the trees had bent themselves aside to make room. Her flashlight flickered once, then died. She smacked it against her palm, but the beam refused to return. Cursing under her breath, she tucked it into her jacket pocket and relied solely on the orb's pulsing glow. That was when she noticed the markings on the trees. At first, she thought they were natural scars, long gouges down the bark, but the lines were too precise, too deliberate. Symbols she didn't recognize spiraled in jagged patterns across the trunks, all pointing inward toward the path she now walked. Her skin prickled. She was being guided, yes, but also herded that as she walked. The air grew colder, heavy enough to sting her throat when she breathed. Her phone buzzed again, muffled in her pocket. Against her better judgment, she pulled it out. The screen glowed with a map application she hadn't opened, displaying a crude red line tracing her current location. Only, the map didn't look right. The streets she knew, the city grid she'd lived in for years, weren't there. Instead, it showed a blank void surrounding the forest, as if the world ended at the tree line. At the very bottom of the screen, 3 words appeared: "No way back." Her hand trembled, and the phone slipped from her grip. The moment it hit the ground, the orb surged brighter, its light cutting across the forest like a spotlight. For an instant, she saw them, shapes in the trees. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Figures pressed tight between the trunks, their silhouettes too thin, too elongated, their limbs bent at impossible angles. They didn't move, but their heads all tilted at once, watching her with a unity that felt rehearsed. When the orb dimmed again, the figures were gone, but the image burned in her vision like an aftershock. Elena staggered backward, nearly tripping over a root. The orb pulsed once more, patient, expectant, as though asking her to continue. And though every part of her screamed to run, to claw her way back to her car and forget she had ever come here, another part whispered louder. "If you stop now, you'll never know what waits at the end of the path." That thought gripped her like a hand on her spine. Heart hammering, she picked up her phone, shoved it into her jacket, and stepped forward again. The orb floated deeper into the forest, and she followed. The deeper Elena went, the more the forest closed in around her. Branches knit together overhead, forming a canopy so thick it felt like a ceiling. The orb floated just ahead, glowing faintly, its rhythm slowing now as though it were deliberately matching her pace. She tried to steady her breathing, but her chest felt tight, as if the air itself resisted her lungs. Every few steps, she glanced at the trees, half expecting to see those stretched silhouettes waiting again. And then, she did. To her right, between 2 oaks scarred with spiraling carvings, a figure stood. This one wasn't hidden in a crowd, nor swallowed by shadows. It stood alone, almost human but not quite. Its limbs were too long, its shoulders too narrow, and its face, or what should have been its face, was smooth, blank as stone. Yet she felt it watching her, every fiber of her body prickling beneath its unseen gaze. She froze, too afraid to move forward, too afraid to move back. The figure tilted its head slowly, the motion deliberate, curious. The orb pulsed brighter, as if in answer. Elena's first instinct was to run, but the forest behind her had gone dark, completely impenetrable. The path she'd walked moments ago was gone, erased like chalk washed from pavement. It was as if the only direction left was forward. Her hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped her phone again. She whispered, barely audible, "What do you want from me?" The blank-faced figure responded. Not with sound, not with movement, but with her phone. The screen lit up in her trembling hand, words crawling across it letter by letter. "Closer." She gasped, clutching the device as if it might anchor her to reality. When she looked up, the figure was gone, vanished into the trees without sound or trace. Only the orb remained, waiting patiently ahead, glowing with a steady, expectant rhythm. Paragraph 5. Elena felt her stomach twist. She wasn't just following anymore. She was being led. Every step forward was a choice, but one she wasn't sure she had the power to refuse. The forest seemed alive, pressing her onward, twisting itself around her will. Still trembling, she lifted her chin, forced herself to put one foot in front of the other, and followed the orb deeper into the unseen. Behind her, something cracked, a branch snapping beneath a weight that wasn't hers. The watcher had not left. Mara sat cross-legged on her couch, scrolling absently through her phone while the hum of the city filtered through her half-open window. She had texted Elena earlier in the evening, annoyed that her friend was out driving when she'd promised to stay in. Elena had always been restless, but tonight Mara couldn't shake a low, nagging worry. When no reply came, she called. The line rang twice before dissolving into static so loud it made her wince and pull the phone away from her ear. No voicemail, just an abrupt, buzzing silence. She tried again, only to hear the same static before the call dropped. The sound lingered in her mind long after she set the phone down, a harsh, grating distortion that didn't feel accidental. With a frown, she opened their last text thread. Her message from an hour ago still hung unanswered. "Are you still in the city? I thought you said you wouldn't drive tonight." What unsettled her most wasn't the lack of response, but the timestamp. It claimed Elena had received the message in an area with no coverage at all. Forest Hollow. Mara bit her lip. Forest Hollow wasn't exactly far from the city, but people avoided it after dark. Too many stories, too many rumors about hikers who never returned. Elena had dismissed it all as small-town ghost tales before, but Mara had always taken them seriously. She pulled up a map on her phone and zoomed in on the area. The network flickered, then reset. The forest appeared, but its borders looked wrong, blurry, as though the satellite images had been smudged by hand. And in the center, a faint glow pulsed on the screen, as if the map itself was alive. She slammed her phone shut and stood, pacing the living room. Something wasn't right. She tried to tell herself Elena would text back soon, that there was probably some mundane explanation for the static, the strange map, the gut-deep dread pressing on her chest. But the truth was harder to ignore. She had felt something when she heard that static, like a whisper buried in the distortion. A voice that almost knew her name. Mara grabbed her jacket, keys jingling in her trembling hand. She didn't have a plan, only the urgent need to find her friend before that pulsing glow, whatever it was, pulled her too far. The city lights dimmed behind her as she drove toward the dark line of trees on the horizon. And as the first signs for Forest Hollow appeared on the roadside, her phone lit up again. One unread message. From Elena. The text contained only 2 words, "Don't come." Elena followed the orb deeper until the forest floor began to change. The pressed path widened into a clearing where the trees leaned outward, forming a rough circle. At the center, the ground was bare. No leaves, no grass. Only dark soil etched with dozens of spirals and jagged lines carved directly into the earth. The orb floated above the circle like a sentinel, pulsing stronger with each beat, until its glow painted the symbols in shifting shadows. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had seen these shapes before, on the trees. They weren't random. They were instructions. Her phone buzzed again, though she hadn't touched it. This time, instead of words, the screen displayed a live feed. At first, it was only static, but slowly an image formed. A road. Streetlights passing in the dark. She recognized it instantly, Mara's car. Elena's stomach lurched. She whispered, "No, she can't be here." As if responding, the phone screen flickered, and text appeared over the image. "She's already coming." Elena's hands shook so violently, she almost dropped the phone. She stared at the circle carved into the ground, at the spirals that seemed to twist deeper the longer she looked. A faint hum rose from the soil, like voices buried underground, vibrating upward through her boots. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but when she turned, the path she had taken was gone. The trees stood shoulder to shoulder, dense and unbroken, their carved symbols glowing faintly as though alive. The only open space left was the circle. The air grew thick, and the hum deepened into something like breathing. The orb drifted lower, lowering itself until it hovered just inches above the soil. Elena's chest tightened. She felt, more than knew, that stepping into the circle would change everything. The forest wanted her there, pressed into its ritual, stitched into its symbols. Her phone vibrated again, showing a new message with no sender. One must stay. Her throat went dry. Stay? Stay where? Stay in here. Elena staggered back, gripping her phone like a lifeline. The forest seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the orb, a living heartbeat pressing in on her from every side. She wanted to scream, to shatter the silence, but her voice felt stolen. In the corner of her eye, something moved. One of the featureless watchers stepped into the clearing, its limbs unnaturally fluid, its head tilted with the same eerie patience as before. Another followed, then another, until a ring of them formed at the edge of the circle. They didn't move closer. They didn't need to. The message was clear. This was where she was meant to be. Mara parked her car at the mouth of the trailhead, the forest rising like a black wall before her. She killed the engine, and the silence that followed was absolute, so heavy it pressed on her ears. The world behind her, the hum of traffic, the glow of city lights, vanished as though it had been cut away with a knife. For a moment, she considered turning back, her hand hovering over the keys, but her phone buzzed in her pocket. When she pulled it free, the screen displayed a single unread message from Elena. Too late. The dirt path swallowed the light from her flashlight almost instantly. Mara swung the beam left and right, but it seemed to fall short, devoured by shadows. Every tree looked the same, their trunks scarred with marks she didn't understand, spirals, jagged slashes, etched deep into the bark as if carved by claws. The further she walked, the more the air thickened, a damp chill clinging to her skin. Each step echoed like she was walking into a cavern instead of a forest. Her phone vibrated again, and she lifted it with shaking hands. The map app was open, though she hadn't touched it. A glowing red line traced her path into the forest, leading deeper, looping in a spiral. At its center was a pulsing point of light. She zoomed in, her breath catching. A tiny figure icon blinked at the spiral's center. Elena. Mara whispered her friend's name out loud, but her voice died as soon as it left her lips, swallowed by the tree's for. Something moved just beyond her flashlight's reach. Mara whipped the beam toward it and froze. A figure stood motionless between the trees, its body impossibly thin, its face smooth and pale as bone. Its head tilted sharply to one side, watching her, or sensing her, in utter silence. Her heart pounded as the light trembled in her hand. When she blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only the carved symbols glowing faintly on the trunks like burning embers. She staggered forward, nearly running now, her flashlight jerking wildly across the path. Her phone's map updated in real time, the glowing red line coiling tighter into the spiral. She was getting closer, but every step carried the unmistakable weight of being followed. She didn't dare turn around. The forest pressed in, the shadows leaning closer with each stride. Somewhere ahead, faint and rhythmic, she saw it. A pale pulsing light, floating between the trees, waiting for her. Mara's headlights cut through the first row of trees as she pulled onto the dirt road leading into Forest Hollow. The moment her tires left the pavement, her radio crackled alive, though she hadn't turned it on. Static poured from the speakers, broken by faint voices she couldn't quite catch. She gripped the wheel tighter, pulse racing as the forest swallowed the last traces of city light behind her. It wasn't just dark, it was oppressive, like the woods themselves were bending inward, trying to crush the intrusion of her care at the same moment. Elena stood trembling at the edge of the carved circle. The watchers ringed her in silent expectation, their elongated limbs stretching into the shadows. The orb hovered low, pulsing with unbearable intensity, its light searing against her eyes. Her phone vibrated again, this time showing not a message but Mara's face, framed by the driver's seat, headlights flashing across her expression. A distorted whisper leaked from the speaker. "She cannot leave." The words layered over themselves in dozens of tones. Elena's stomach turned cold. Mara slowed the car, her eyes narrowing as movement flashed between the trees. She thought at first it was deer, but the silhouettes were too tall, too still. One by one, featureless heads turned toward her, their smooth faces gleaming white in the high beams. Panic clawed at her chest. She hit the gas, swerving as the figures seemed to multiply, slipping between the trunks with unnatural speed. She couldn't tell if she was moving forward or if the forest was simply folding around her. Paragraph 4. Inside the clearing, Elena could feel the watchers closing in, though their feet never moved. The ground beneath her seemed to breathe, the carved spirals glowing brighter until she swore they were spinning. She dropped to her knees, covering her ears against the rising hum, but it filled her anyway, vibrating through her bones. Her phone fell to the dirt, the screen flickering between Mara's face and a single repeating word. "Choose." Mara's headlights cut suddenly into a clearing. She slammed the brakes, heart hammering as she saw her. Elena, kneeling at the center of a glowing circle, surrounded by a ring of impossible figures. The orb hovered just above her head, pulsing like a beacon. The watchers turned in unison, their faceless gazes fixing on Mara's car as though her arrival had been expected all along. For one suspended moment, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the orb flared so brightly it painted everything in white. The clearing burned white under the orb's sudden flare. Mara shielded her eyes, slamming the car into park before stumbling out into the dirt. The watchers stood in perfect stillness, their faceless heads turned toward her, their elongated arms slack at their sides. Elena knelt inside the circle, her face pale, her phone buzzing weakly beside her in the soil. The spirals etched into the ground pulsed like veins, light running through them in time with the orb. Mara called her name, but the sound came out fractured, broken in half as though the forest itself had split her voice. Elena raised her head slowly, her eyes wide with fear and something else, resignation. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. The orb drifted lower, hovering between the two women, its glow dividing them. Elena's phone screen flickered back to life, scrawling words across the glass in jagged letters. "One must stay." Mara read it, her stomach dropping into ice. She staggered toward her friend, but the watchers shifted in unison, their faceless forms leaning forward just enough to remind her that the rules here were not hers to break. The ground beneath them throbbed with the sound of a heartbeat, deep, resonant, endless. Elena struggled to stand, her knees weak. "It's me they want," she said hoarsely. "They won't let both of us leave." Mara shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "No, we'll find another way. We'll fight them. We'll." But her words faltered. The forest pressed closer, suffocating, demanding. The orb pulsed harder now, so bright it cast shadows like iron bars across their faces. Then the watchers moved. Not closer, but inward, their long limbs stretching above the circle, forming an unbroken cage around the women. Mara grabbed Elena's hand, desperate, unwilling to let go. For one blinding moment, she saw it. Flashes of all the others who had stood here before them. Hikers, wanderers, faces both ancient and modern, all trapped in the spirals, all swallowed by the choice. One must stay. The words weren't just on the phone. They were in the soil, in the air, in her bones. Mara screamed, pulling Elena toward her, but the orb surged downward, splitting them apart with a wall of blinding light. The watchers tilted their heads in perfect unison, waiting. Elena's face was the last thing Mara saw before the world went white, her lips forming silent words, her expression equal parts terror and peace. And then the light collapsed. The clearing was empty. The soil still bore its carved spirals, but only one woman stood in its center. Her phone buzzed weakly with a final message. "You are free."